The car audio big 3 upgrade, where we add 1. A power wire going from the positive to the positive on the alternator, 2. A ground from the negative to the chassis, and 3. From the chassis down to the engine block. If you're into car audio, then you've probably heard about the big 3 upgrade, where you upgrade the positive and the negative of your car's electrical system. I thought I'd make a quick video explaining what that means and how I went about doing it. Starting off with the easy one, the negative. This is often the black wire and basically anything metal. Here you can see the battery negative goes straight to the chassis. This you can remove and connect anywhere you want, but it's best to keep it shorter. The only variation to this is the engine block. Because it sits on rubber mounts, it's isolated from the chassis. So a wire is added to connect the engine block, as you can see here, across to the chassis here. So again, this makes all metal connected and negative. The slightly trickier one is the positive side of the battery. You will often have some sort of distribution board for this side. This is sometimes located on the battery terminal itself, but as you can see, mine's over here in a separate compartment. So all this is taking that positive terminal to a chunk of metal that becomes then positive. This then branches off through fuses to power stuff in your car. There's a few positive wires we'll find, but only some that we care about for car audio. An example of a random positive wire is this one here, which goes down to the starter motor. Usually you'll find this, the alternator cable, and then one to the power distribution. We can see here the gear linkages, so we know this is the gearbox and that is the starter motor. So one of the wires that we'll be interested in, which I traced back, is another power wire that goes to the alternator. So I trace this cable back through the engine bay. Obviously you don't need to take the whole front off your car to do this, but just to show you that this goes all the way through there and then to the positive terminal on the alternator. Now you more than likely will only see one stud on the alternator, and this goes back to what I said before in that the negative for this will go through the engine block, through that linkage, and then back to the battery that way. So considering the whole car is basically a piece of wire. So I'll leave the factory wire in place, and then what I'll do is undo this nut and I'll add my own wire. Just a random tip, bring the nut with you, because then you can find a bolt for the nut and then you can find a crimp for the bolt. I bought these terminal blocks from Konceptz. They come with these parallel terminal posts, and you can also get some perpendicular ones, so you can keep the factory wiring. Here is just a quick diagram to show you what I'm doing. So from the battery we have the positive wire, which simply needs to go to the alternator positive, and then we know that the alternator negative and the engine negative is all negative because it's metal combined. And then the car is obviously negative as well. So we need to go from the battery terminal negative to the car, and then from the car or chassis negative to the engine block. So here's our 3 wires. We have the first negative from the battery to the car. We have our second negative, which is going from the car to the engine block, connecting to the alternator. So that's 2. The reason we do this is because there is no direct connection from the alternator negative to the battery negative. So it's easier to just follow the factory wiring and upgrade these 2. Also, if you don't upgrade both of these, the current will flow through the factory wiring, and then effectively you'll get a bottleneck, and this is why your headlights can dim. So that's 2, and then the 3 for the big 3 is the power wire from the alternator to the battery positive. For large crimps you can use a hydraulic crimper tool or this cheap one I found off Amazon. The key thing for anything electrical is always pull test your wires. And if you can, try not let any of the 5,000 cores slip outside the crimp. Here's an example of 2 types of zero gauge. On the left is the copper clad aluminium, and on the right is oxygen free copper. Oxygen free copper is a lot more expensive, but for high power systems I'd highly recommend using it. From this new Konceptz kit I'll be using this split corrugated loom in the engine bay to protect the wire. And here it is, the power wire installed, running through with the factory wire. And then for now I've left all the excess because I'll trim it back later. Now moving on to the engine block to chassis earth wire. I'm looking at the underside of the battery tray. I can see it's quite flat. So if I were to take the wire from here and go backwards with it, it won't collide with anything. Either way, I can see that it's going to be below these mounting points. But also I've got to be careful of the gearbox linkages. And with that battery tray in, we have 2 of the 3 complete, with excess ready to loom into the new Konceptz terminals. With those added, as you can see here, I've got my own 0 gauge going down to the alternator, the factory wiring, and I still have space for a 0 gauge and another 4 gauge. So all that's left to do now is the battery negative wiring to the chassis and then to the engine block. I've kept the factory negative to the chassis, but I've also added this 0 gauge quick release. And then just like with the positive terminal, there's still space to add additional wires if I want to. And there we have it, the completed upgrade. I've used the spare positive 0 gauge terminal to feed a fuse that will feed my system. Thanks for watching, comment any questions down below.